Hey everyone, Anthony Morganti here. A few days ago, Adobe released new versions of Lightroom, including a new version of Lightroom Classic version 13. When that version was released, I did a video talking about a few of the new, more notable features found in that version of Lightroom. One of those features is something called support for HDR output. I mentioned in my video that I wasn't really up to speed on it, but I did my best and fumbled my way through it. I did say, though, that I would learn about it, and once I did, I would do a video on it. Well, I found this great article on Adobe's website. This article explains everything you need to know about this new feature. I'll have a link to it in the description below this video. Yesterday, I recorded a video demonstrating this new feature and talking about everything I learned from that article. Unfortunately, when I went to render the video, I found that the software I used to record my screen, it's called ScreenFlow, wasn't capable of recording HDR output. So right now I have, for example, this image in HDR, and the sky has a lot of definition in it, a lot of color, a lot of texture. When I take it out of HDR, it's just kind of gray and flat. Well, I'm seeing that as I'm looking at it right now, but when I render this video, it just is like gets whiter, it gets, kind of brighter up in the sky. You don't see that definition. So I scrapped that entire video because I went through 8 different images showing you how great this HDR output is, and you can't or won't be able to see it in my video. So what we're going to do is today, I'm just going to give you kind of a truncated version of what I did yesterday. I'm just going to work with this one image. But what I am going to do is in the description below this video, I'll have a link. You could download JPEGs of this image, one in HDR and one in SDR. That's high dynamic range and standard dynamic range. And you could hopefully, if your monitor is an HDR monitor, you'll be able to see the difference between the two. You'll be able to see what I'm seeing when I click this HDR button. No other editing was done to it. It's just an export from Lightroom in SDR. I click this button and then exported it in HDR. And those are the 2 JPEGs you'll see. Hopefully that will give you a better idea of what I'm talking about. Of course, you could try it for yourself. Hopefully, if you have an HDR monitor, just go over here and find an image, usually with sky, and just click that HDR button and you should see a dramatic change. Now, let's just try to describe it and talk about it without you actually being able to see what it looks like as I'm doing it. Now, when you have an image, like in the past, Lightroom didn't support HDR output, so it was just standard dynamic range. And the dynamic range had 256 levels of brightness. And if you look at the histogram, at the far left is absolute black, and that's got a value of 0. And at the far right is absolute white, and that has a value of 255. So you have 256 levels of brightness. I actually probably could better show you on the tone curve. If I hover over the left side here, you could see in the top left-hand corner of the tone curve, it says 0. That's 0. If I go to the top right, it's 255. So absolute black is 0, absolute white is 255. When you have HDR output, you have 501 levels of brightness, and all that extra headspace is in the highlights. So when you convert an image or when you click this HDR button, like I did just now, it won't affect the shadows at all. It will just give you a lot more headspace in the highlights. Hence, when I look at this image, the sky now has all this definition, texture. I could see clouds and colors. It's really like night and day difference. If you look at the histogram, you'll notice that the left side of the histogram is standard definition. You could see SDR. So, or standard dynamic, I should say. I'm sorry, SDR, standard dynamic range. So this is the left side of the histogram. And you'll notice now the HDR side, there's all this information here that was cut off because, in the past, because Lightroom couldn't output for an HDR display. So now we have all this information that we could see in the highlights. And similarly, if I go to the tone curve and I hover over the left hand, well, first of all, you'll notice the tone curve has 2 parts now, SDR and HDR. Left side is standard, right side is high. If I hover over the left side, we still have 0, but if I go over that right side, well, I probably won't do it here. I think I got to do it here. You'll notice that it's if I could get it up there, it's going to be 500. Even though it's not saying it. But if I played around here enough and I had all day, and in the video I did yesterday, I was able to do it. Of course, I had to scrap that video. But anyway, trust me, it will go to 500 if you play with it enough. It's only showing 499, but it will go to 500 because I've had it done. So you have 200 or you have 501 levels of brightness. So you have all this additional headspace. So you could put in or you could see textures, color, and things you weren't able that would just get kind of grayed out or whited out before when you were working in SDR. Now, as far as editing is concerned, this is where it gets a little bit trickier. When you go, I have it in HDR now. When you go to the basic tab, as soon as you put it in HDR, you'll have this section here, tone, like we always had. That hasn't changed. And you could come in and start adjusting it. The thing, though, is the white and black point is a little more difficult to kind of determine when you're working with HDR, because in the past, if you're in SDR, as I am right now, if I wanted to get a white point, I would hold in the Alt Option key, click on the white slider. The screen's all black, and if I go to the right, I would go till some colors start coming through, and then I would back it off so I'm not clipping any highlights, right? Alternatively, I could turn on the clipping indicators by hitting the J key and move this to the right, and you can see I'm starting to get red coming in. I'm starting to clip those highlights, so I'd back it off, right? Well, the thing is, because you have all this extra space in the highlights now, and not every monitor is 100% HDR compatible, you're going to get different results on different monitors. Let me try to explain. I'll go to HDR now. Now you'll notice that I have the clipping indicators on and that we have multiple colors up here, but we have this red. That is clipping. But if you look at the histogram, I'm not actually clipping. I'm just clipping, I guess for my monitor. And a better way to show it, let me take off the clipping indicators by hitting the J key. Let me hold in the Alt Option key. Let me take the white slider, move it to the right. See that red? Now watch as I move it to the right. I am actually starting to clip the entire sky. All right, make note of this right now. What I'm going to do is I'm going to cut away from this, and I'm going to show you the same exact image on my MacBook. My MacBook has an HDR display that is more capable than the iMac display is. And you'll notice I'm going to take this white slider on my MacBook, move it all the way to the right, and we have very little red showing up in the sky. So I'm going to show you that right now. Okay, do you see how it's really dependent on the monitor you're using? So it's a little more difficult to get a white point in or when you're working with an HDR image. What I suggest you do is you look at the histogram. And you kind of have to know what you're actually editing for. If you're editing and you know it's going to be on a HDR monitor that is fully capable, that it will be able to render all 501 levels of brightness, what you can do is you could go to this, look at this histogram, and you could go and push things so everything's almost to the right, the far right. So I could go to whites, and as I move it, you'll see that the histogram is pushing to the right, and then right around there is where some pixels start to fall or go off the right-hand side of the histogram. So that's how you could edit. Now, for me, on this monitor, when I do that, I'm getting just total white up here, totally blown out, because this monitor on my 2.5-year-old iMac isn't full HDR capable. Now, if you Google it, it will say it is, but it isn't. It's obviously not. There are degrees there. I don't think there's a convention out there that says, this has to be, 501 levels of brightness is HDR period, and you can't claim your monitor is an HDR monitor unless it can reproduce 501 levels of brightness. I don't think there's a convention out there that says that. So you'll have a lot of manufacturers saying, yes, it's HDR capable, but most of them, or many of them at least, are just partially HDR capable. If I'm wrong on that, I'm not a techie. Someone in the description or in the comment section, just correct me. But that's what it seems to be to me. So with that said, you have to know what you're outputting it to. If you're going to export it to put it like on your website, what you could do is you could edit this for SDR and HDR. And if it's on your website, most modern web browsers will then render it according to the monitor that it's being used on. So the browser would be smart enough to know that it's on, let's say, a non-HDR monitor, and you'll be able then to have that image on your website, and when it's viewed on that person's monitor, they're going to see it in SDR as you intend them to see it in SDR. On the other hand, if another person has an HDR monitor, when they view it on their monitor, they'll see it in HDR as you intend them to see it in HDR. Let me try to explain how this is done. What you would do is come in and edit your image as you normally would, first in HDR. So I have the HDR button on, and I'm just editing as I normally would. Now, what I recommend you do with the whites is just look at the histogram and just push it to the right to the point where it starts to hit that right-hand side. With blacks, you could still hold the Alt Option key in and go to the left, and you'll see colors come through if you want. So that you could still do. Now, there are other ways you could visualize this. You could click right here to visualize HDR, and we see these different colors. And the way HDR is kind of divvied up, I guess, for lack of a better term, in Lightroom, it's the number of stops above SDR white. Now, if we look at the histogram, you'll notice that on the far left is SDR, right? And if I hover there, you can see every pixel that has an overlay on it now is standard dynamic range, and it will render this way on every monitor. It should render this way on every monitor. If I go to the right to the HDR section, you can see there's a little quarter here of this far right that is in cyan as I hover over it. And that, if you see right there, it's 0 to 1 stop above SDR white. If I go to the right of that to this blue section, you'll see blue come on the display. And that is 1 to 2 stops above SDR white. If we go here to this section where you see some purple, this is 2 to 3 stops above SDR white. And then finally at the very end, this is magenta. There's a tiny bit of magenta there. You'll see that this is 3 or more stops above SDR white. So what you may want to do is maybe be careful that you never get any magenta in it or something like that. Now, the problem is if you are editing in HDR and you're going to share it on, I know for a fact, on Instagram and Facebook, they're going to strip out metadata, and it won't be able to be rendered like it would be if you had it on your own website and someone was looking at it in a more modern, up-to-date browser. Unfortunately, those services, Facebook, Instagram, they strip out metadata. So the thing is, when you do export, and I'll show you how to export in a moment, there is an option to export it in HDR. When you do, it will include a gain map, and the gain map will have basically an edited HDR image, and it will have an edited SDR image there. And that basically tells the browser how to render it. So we just, let's say, did our edit for HDR. Let's just say, for the sake of argument, we're done. So we'll turn this off. By the way, there is this drop down where you could limit it to 1 stop. So right here, see how it's turned all this off over here? So you may want to then, you could edit, if you know your monitor or the person that's going to view it isn't going to have anything that could see it past 1 stop above SDR white, then you're going to want to go to this drop down and change it to 1 stop and then edit it back. or 2 stops, then 3 stops, 4 stops, and so on. So you can do that there as well, just to know where you go full. Now, once you have it edited in HDR, you should edit it in SDR. To do that, roll this open and turn this on. Now you'll see the image in SDR now on your screen. And now you have similar controls, a little different. You have a brightness control here. And by the way, any editing you do here for SDR will not affect your HDR output at all. So this is totally independent. So you come in here and kind of edit everything out. I'm having to make it a lot brighter, and I'm just doing it very quickly. So, all right, so there's, let's say, my SDR edit, even though it's a horrible edit, but that's my SDR edit. And there's my HDR edit. Then you could come in and do the rest of your editing. I'd keep SDR off while you're doing it and just do the rest of your editing for texture, clarity. If you're going to do anything with tone curve, if you're going to do anything vibrant, saturation, anything else, just do it now. Then come back and just double check it at what it looks like on SDR and see what it looks like. When you're satisfied with both edits, export it. Bring up the export dialog box. And what you want to do is go to this section here on, let me see if I can find it, file settings. And you could export it as anything really. We'll go to JPEG, and you can see this button right here, HDR output. Just click that box. When you click that box, it will include that gain map where a browser will be able to render it the way you want it rendered. Also, I strongly suggest that you bring clarity up. I've been reading that this HDR output, because it has so many levels of brightness, it's more apt to show like a pixelation or compression if you have quality a bit lower, like even around 80. So it's more apt to show, that little kind of blocky look. If you have like a uniform color, like a blue sky, it kind of shows like this kind of weird blocky look. That's because quality is too low. So just turn quality up. It's going to give you a bigger file though. And you'll notice though, if you export, and you'll notice if you download the 2 JPEGs that I'm showing for this, video that you could download, you'll notice that the HDR one is probably about twice as large as the non-HDR one. And that's just because of the gain map and the way it's rendered. So you click this box, you could choose what color space you want. There's a couple available for this. And this HDR box is available in all of the files. So I'll go down PSD, TIFFs, PNG. Now DNG, you won't have the box, but it is a raw file. So all that information is going to be there anyway. So it's the raw file. Don't worry about it. And if you use the original file type, it's going to export with a sidecar file, and that sidecar file will include all this information. So really, everything here is available to you if you want to export it as HDR. So you can do that very quickly. Now, I do want to show you one more thing very, very quickly, if I could. Let's take it off HDR. All right. Let's say you're in the tone curve and you're in SDR and you're going to put a shape on the curve. So let's just put, I don't know, like let's do it the more conventional way. All right. I don't know what I'm doing. Let's just say you're doing a shape on the curve, something crazy. All right. Who cares what it looks like? I just put this weird shape on the curve. Then later you go to HDR. All right. What will happen is when you go to the tone curve, you'll notice that weird shape I put in there, it all got put over on the left-hand side in the SDR side of the tone curve. The reason why I bring this up is you may have some images that you have edited already and you want to see what they look like in HDR, and you'll just go over to the basic tab and you're already edited and you'll click that HDR button. And it's going to look really weird, or you're going to have a hard time getting an HDR edit from it. If that's the case, go to the tone curve, because it's possible you may have done something in the tone curve and it's just making it look really weird when you're in HDR mode. So in that case, right click on the tone curve and reset the channel. And then you could go back to editing the way you want to edit for the image. And then if you need to use the tone curve, you could use the tone curve while you're in HDR mode. So make sure you do that. So That, I think, is everything I could do. It's really a shame that I wasn't able to do what I wanted to do, that I did in yesterday's video. But for instance, like on this image in yesterday's video, it's just an unedited raw file, and it's an okay image. But as soon as you put it in HDR, it's just the stained glass windows just come alive, and there's like this dappled light coming in, and then in the video, it looks horrible. So that's it. Thank you, everyone who watches my videos. I really do appreciate it. Talk to you guys soon.